I want to introduce our moderator for today. He is Erwin Hargrove from Vanderbilt, Professor Emeritus in Economics.
No,
Political science. I'm sorry. Oh, dear. Okay. Well, political science, for sure. And so he will introduce our other guests. So let's welcome Erwin Hargrove from Political Science.
Thank you very much. You hear me?
No, speak. Yeah, it's on.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now you hear me. You're in for a treat. We had a dry run about a month ago, and I listened to these people, and they really know their stuff. They really know about schools as institutions. I mean, I went to school, and I had 3 children in school, but I never really understood schools. But these people do. So let me introduce Dale Farron, who's professor of teaching and learning and psychology, and then Lynette Waddell, assistant professor of practice of mathematics, and Barbara Stingle, professor of the practice of education, director of secondary education at Peabody. They're going to talk about early education, middle schools, and high schools.
Well, guess what? It didn't work. Where's Kenny? Woo! Okay. Now, do I have to lean all the way, or should I take that thing? How's this? No? Will it work? Okay. I have a very loud voice. Can you hear me? All right. So way back in the back. Okay. Thank you. I am delighted to be here, delighted to be able to speak to this group. I know several of you. I can't imagine what you're doing here to hear me. But I want you to know this is my Occupy Wall Street version. Okay. Let's see if our little thing's going to work. Well, it might not work. Okay, we'll do this. All right. So, expectations for children are changing. Human beings haven't changed in the sense that the way our brains grow and develop, but we are very flexible and we adapt to what's being required of us. And the requirements for children are changing. So when I went to kindergarten, I know you think, she's too old to have gone to kindergarten. Well, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and Georgia had universal kindergarten way long time ago. And I grew up in a working class section of Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the things I remember vividly about kindergarten is that she would have us all sit around in a circle and we would practice breathing through our noses. I could not make that up. We would have to close our mouths and breathe through our noses, which my husband has told me he thinks was actually very helpful to me long term. But I once gave this illustration of how things have changed at a conference in Harvard, and a Harvard pediatrician sent me this picture. It's a picture of mouth breathers. Mouth breathers have adenoids and deadened intellects. So I've always been really grateful to my kindergarten teacher. But why the changes are important because of the way the brain functions. And my colleagues got upset with me because, how can we compete with a picture of the brain? Well, I won't show it very long. Okay, so we start learning in utero. Babies start learning, the way you can learn language so fast when you're 6 months old and a year old is you actually start learning the prosody, the rhythms of your language in utero from maternal speech that you hear. I know, isn't that cool? Okay, all right. So your brain starts, even in utero, getting organized in response to the stimulation it's getting. And when the same experiences happen again and again, your brain organizes that way. So repeated, predictable experiences are very important. Other connections, I mean, the infant is every man. We could potentially speak each language in the universe, but we don't, because we start losing connections at about 6 or 7 months so that we can focus on the language we have to learn. And the brain is highly dependent on these regular patterns, and what young children are doing, the metabolism of a young child's brain is about 50% greater than that of an adult. And anybody who's had children can say, right, now I understand. So they're actively trying to make sense of things, trying to figure out things, up till about 7 or 8. So those early grades are really important for the kind of sense children make. So what do these early experiences affect? They affect your language ability, especially vocabulary. They affect your, important, which I'm going to come back to again and again, they affect your ability to learn. These early experiences affect your actual ability to learn new things. So you need to learn to attend, to focus on what's important, to persist even when things are difficult, to understand cause and effect, that if you do this, it's going to cause something else to happen, even if that's days later. And it is, in the early experiences are actually the foundation for math. Now, if I had your whole time, I would spend a lot of time on this, and I won't. But there's something called the approximate number system that actually starts at infancy, where children understand quantities before they can even count. And when experiences begin to layer on counting onto that elemental understanding, children have a good understanding of math. And emotionally, children have to learn to regulate stress. Okay. So here's my stress. None of you are feeling stressed, right? I am. Okay, so I'm thankful to Megan Gunner for this. So she has developed this system. It talks about early adversity leading to stress reactivity, meaning you have either an overreaction to stress when it happens or an underreaction to stress when it happens. And that underreaction in classrooms is really important because it leads teachers to misunderstand children's responses when they try to discipline them. So it's related to your ability to regulate your stress, and the caregiving environment can be an intermediary between early adverse experiences and your stress reactivity. All of those lead eventually into adulthood, into problems with physical health and problems with mental health. And if you're interested in this, there's a whole group now called Adverse Early Experiences, Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, that you can Google, that gets you to a website where the CDC is actually getting very interested in these adverse experiences. But my interest is in telling you that when you start thinking about urban school systems, urban environments are highly stressful for children. And when we look at children's performance as they go into the early grades of school, from the same poverty level, they look much worse if they've been in an urban environment and experienced that poverty than in a rural environment. But what can we do? Well, the early grades in school constitute that early caregiving environment. They are children's introduction to being in school, which is why I want to stick at the early grades of school, because I think that's where we need to make the difference. So being able to learning to regulate your stress depends upon your perception. Think about you as an adult, your perception that you have some control over what's happening to you. How helpless you feel when you're in the midst of something over which you feel you have no control. You can't control the outcome. You can't control what's going to happen to you. That's how children feel in a lot of our early grades classrooms. You need responsive, individualized teaching. You need predictable experiences. So I have to be careful. How many minutes have I got? All right. For one thing, we found just recently in studies that we've done that the more time, that when you introduce children to school, the more time they actually have to leave their classroom and go do specials and various things like that, the worse their outcomes are. Why? Because it's not predictable experiences. It's easier to set up predictability if you're in the same environment. And early grades children need predictable, safe, dependable environments. They need positive support for learning and exploring. So having these experiences affects children's ability to learn in the middle grades and high school. Why are early childhood experiences so stressful? And they are. Because they're group environments and they're noisy. You ever been in a first grade classroom? Right. And the children have little control over what's going to happen to them in most classrooms. And they are developing in very individually different ways. So there's a lot of variation in what young children know and can do, and that variation does not mean they need special education. It means they need some sort of support so that they all wind up jostling eventually toward the same place on the start line. But our early grades instruction our early grades are increasingly focusing on instruction as opposed to helping children to learn. And because they're focused on instruction, behavior management takes up enormous amounts of time. I'll tell you, now this is something you can talk about at the next cocktail party, which you can invite me. What are predictors of early grade school? Well, guess what? Literacy, which is sucking up all the oxygen in the room, is not a great predictor of long-term school success. Math is. Early math skills in pre-K, K, and first grade predict long-term, not just math, but also long-term reading. Reading does predict reading, but it doesn't predict math, and it doesn't predict much of anything else. The other thing that really predicts long-term success in school is our early measures of self-regulation. The things we talked about, your ability to attend, and your ability to persist, your ability to shift your focus. As my colleague says, your ability to adopt the teacher's agenda as your own, instead of just doing what you want to do. Those early measures are related, but not strongly, to early math and literacy skills. They're a different kind of thing. They're separate. They predict later math and reading, and now, this should not be a surprise, they're particularly important for predicting grades. So I had a daughter who could knock the top off of any standardized test, but we barely kept her in high school. Don't tell anybody that. Okay, so basic skills are increasingly becoming the focus, and they're a problem because they're relatively easy to teach, they're relatively easy for the teacher to focus on, but the method of teaching that they're using does not work for many groups of children. It's particularly particularly boys, because it happens in whole group. The child is to be listening rather than acting. The data we have from classrooms, on average, teachers are talking 73% of the time. We have some teachers that we have seen 3 times across the year that we have never observed listening to anyone. So, this kind of instruction requires listening rather than acting, and often it focuses on decontextualized knowledge. So it's not math knowledge about how numbers are arranged, it's just recognizing a numeral or recognizing a letter. Those children are increasingly being exposed to that. The question is this going to help them do better long-term in school? And the secret I'm going to tell you here is that we don't know. But if it doesn't, it's the 4th grade teachers who are going to get the blame, not the pre-K or kindergarten or 1st grade teachers. Because why? Because that's when we have the TCAP, and that's when the TCAP actually starts testing conceptual knowledge. So, I'll go quickly. All right, I'll go past that. All right, so here. Can we do this? Then I'll leave. Then I'll see. You just have to ask me back. Okay. So first of all, we have a school board at MNPS that is not committed to pre-kindergarten. It doesn't consider pre-kindergarten as part of the K-12 system. Well, it's very hard to link pre-K to K if you don't think of it as part of the system. Second, we have not reached out to like other preschool programs as other communities have to create a single way of looking at helping to prepare the riskiest, most neediest children for school. So we have Head Start, and we have pre-K, we have Title I, we have United Way pre-Ks, and none of them are working together right now. We need a vision for pre-K through third grade. And this vision has to be not only in the central office, but it has to be shared with the teachers, and it has to affect the kind of professional development you have. So that people understand, I'm preparing children to do this in first grade. In first grade, I'm preparing them to do this in second and this in third, and we're all linked up to what's going to be expected in the upper elementary and middle grades. Is this possible? Yes! Other systems have done it. One urban system in North Carolina that I work with has a full-time pre-K coordinator and a curriculum specialist, and serves on a committee to link the curriculum with their K through third grade. Vancouver, British Columbia links its entire system in terms of government. They link their health system, their crime rates, and income rates, and use that to affect educational policy. Montgomery County Schools outside of Washington, D.C. has aligned its system's early learning programs and services, and now to create a seamless pre-K through 12. Wonderful document that's on web if you want to get it. Jerry West is the superintendent. Once we fixed the system, the kids were suddenly okay. Same kids, just a different system. And we started at the beginning of the education value chain, early learning. Tennessee is creating 2 comprehensive sites for teachers, families, and community partners coordinating pre-K through third grade. I serve on the math panel. We have some people here at Peabody who've served on the literacy one. One is called Read Tennessee. It's already functioning. You can go to the website. There are portals for teachers to go in, for parents to go in, for community people to go in. When you go in, there are videos, there are activities, there are things to do, and a description of the standards and what's expected of children. And the math one's going to come online probably in November. So we do. There is some hope. Read Tennessee. It's pretty easy, and it's real easy to get there. That's it.
Songs. And what spiders?
Even though I worked in elementary schools, I only worked in grades 4 to 8 for my 18 years of teaching and coaching. So I have a really strong heart for middle school. I know everyone's like, oh, middle school. When I used to say I was a middle school math teacher, everyone looked at you like you had, 5 heads or something, because middle school, that's crazy. It is a very crazy time, not only for the teachers, but for the students. And so I want to just start first by talking about what is middle school. Because back in the day, it used to be called junior high. And the shift kind of came over because they realized that we needed to have something different for middle school. Oh, wait, my notes are not showing up here. Okay, there we go. So the difference is in middle school, they're looking for interdisciplinary teams of teachers, rather than just going like in high school where you go to the math teacher, you go to your history teacher, you go to your English teacher. In middle school, they develop a team, and the team is one teacher of every subject plus probably a special education teacher. And the goal of that is to create a community for the students you have so that they have someone to talk to, someone to be with. The teachers know their students much better, and they're able to support them through middle school. The other one is they focus on knowing and supporting the students. You want to know middle school students. You want to know those kids because they bring a lot to them. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. They need to have you be on their side in a sense, that they can come to you with issues and that they can come to you when they have academic as well as social problems. And that's another purpose for the teaming. There's also, in middle schools, most of them have either homerooms, which is not just homeroom where you're getting attendance taken, or advisories. It's a time for students to have someone to talk to about issues that are going on in school, to get through and have someone that they can come to for other areas besides their academics, in addition to academics, but other things besides that. And then in some middle schools, in particular the middle school that I worked in, and one of the things I loved about it the most was that we had what they call looping, meaning that my students stayed with me from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We just pushed in another group every year that then stayed with us for 2 or 3 years. We switched over to 6th grade about toward the end of my tenure there at the middle school. But that also really helped to know who the students were. The following year every year is easy to start the year off because you had half of the students already. They know what's expected. They know what to do when they come in. So they help you develop the community that you want to have in a middle school. So looping became a really important part for me and for other middle schools in order to develop that community that you want. So what are the issues of middle school? Well, I think, and most of us who've worked in middle schools, and the research says the biggest thing about middle school is the adolescent stage. Students in adolescence are going through puberty. Usually girls first, boys come later. There's a lot going on hormonally, the growth spurt. A big deal in middle school is the dependence versus independence. Well, Dale was talking about the issue of self-regulation and making the teacher's agenda your own. Well, when middle school comes around, they don't want it. They actively don't want to take on the teacher's agenda or their parents' agenda or anybody's agenda. They want their own agenda. But on the other hand, they know that they're still children, and they know that they need someone to help them and structure their lives. So they're going through that major tug of war in their lives at that point. And it comes out in behaviors. It comes out in a lot of emotional things. How many girls I had crying all the time, or getting angry over here, having a fight over here about something and then the next day they've forgotten. That's that whole adolescence of dependence versus independence going on. Also, of course, you have identity development and the stress of peers. Being in the peer group is so important in middle school. You want to be part of the group, you want to be in. And if you're not in, then it makes you feel like you're not a good person, or you have some issues, or no one is on your side. So that's another huge issue in middle school. And then the cognitive and emotional changes that occur. In addition to puberty, then the schoolwork is much more difficult. You're expected to do more on your own all of a sudden from going from elementary to middle, and that causes a shift in the way that they think about themselves. Am I really as smart as I was in elementary school? It feels like I'm not anymore. Or, wow, I really struggled with elementary school. Now I'm really drowning in this academic environment. I just can't handle it. Whether that's true or not, a lot of them begin to think that because it's a different system and it's a different structure. So what are some other areas that we have to think about? Academics is, of course, huge in middle school. Dale alluded to the fact that 4th grade teachers, that's the year you start testing. Well, the federal law says grades 3 to 8 are testing. It used to be you test in grade 4 or 5, then you might test in 8, and then you test in 11. Now, every grade from 3 to 8 has to test. So the testing regime has come down very, very heavily in the middle school. And it has impacted dramatically the way that middle school teachers teach, and the data that they have to collect, and the way that they interact with students. Also in middle school, there's a lot more academic rigor. We're moving them, it is a transition. We're moving them from the elementary school to high school. And you want to make sure that they're able to do the work. They're getting less support, but they're feeling like, oh gosh, I used to be good, I can't do this. So that is something else that's another stressor on middle school students. And also, finally, the one thing that I just read in some research is that they talk about schoolwork moving from task-oriented in elementary school, meaning that the idea of getting the work done, working on the project, or working on a game and thinking through it is more focused on in elementary school than it is in middle school. Particularly now in the last 10 years or 15 years with the testing regime, the emphasis is on performance. How well do you do on the task, and how do you complete it, and how do you understand it? And if you don't, I've got to do it again. And it's not about the process of learning, it's about the products of learning. So what helps? What might work? What do we try to do in middle schools to help with all of that going on for our students and our teachers? Well, one of the big research, a study that I was just reading, talked about the issue of parental support. And it's not just parental support and going to the PTA meetings or helping with homework, but it's really about the goal setting. What kind of goals do parents set for their kids? Do they set beyond high school? One of the research studies I read that parents who only say, oh, I just want you to get out of high school, those students have a greater chance of dropping out of high school, middle school or high school, than students whose families push them to look toward college. And we want parents to be able to support their kids. We know, if those of you who've gone through middle school age children, my son is 16, and I'm glad he's done with that age, but It's a very stressful time. There are days when I'm thinking, like, where did you come from? I don't remember raising you. I know I didn't tell you to act like that. But you go through it, and being able to support students through that, hearing them, but also setting the boundaries is extremely important. The other thing that we really want to try to do in middle schools is to find unconventional ways to support their academics on both sides, for gifted students as well as struggling students. What are different things you can do to help them? The after-school programs, having lunch business meetings. Some of the teachers that I work with, oh, I didn't even mention that I work for, I'm the director of the TLUS program in Metro, is this where we have students that, sorry for this aside. One of the things I know that one of my teachers has what she calls a business lunch, where she has students come in to either finish homework, to talk about issues that they're having, to help them do some remediation. Those are the kind of unconventional things that in middle school we need to do, because the students are struggling not only academically, but emotionally, and they need the support in both areas. So we have to do different things, not just your typical, you get a 0, or I gotta call your parents, or stay after school and do the work. We've gotta find different things to do with them in order to support them. We also look to develop the school community. And as a whole, the whole school has to develop the structure that they want the students to work within, and hopefully get them to take on the agenda of the school and be part of the school community. And that's not only students as well. Teachers have to also be a part of that community. We want to look for the support, as I discussed earlier, respect of each other, and engagement opportunities beyond the classroom. We need to bring them together as a community to make sure that everyone feels like they're a part of the school. And then for teachers, we need to continue to provide their ongoing professional development, that not only in their content area, because in middle school, it's like the first time teachers have to have a content focus. And we've just recently come up with certification for middle school. Either you had an elementary certification, which is all subjects, or you had a secondary 712, which was, just one content area. Now we have a middle school certification that kind of focuses on adolescence as well as content, and it's something that's really supporting new teachers in the field. But in addition to that, we still have to support their content pedagogy. We still need to support their idea of collaboration, developing the community within the school and outside of the school, and then working on what it means to teach adolescents. They need to have continual support and working through that, because it can be very, very tiring and very taxing on you to deal with that on a daily basis. So moving over to math, since math is my area, and that's kind of with Dale over there, I've taught math for a number of years, and I am the math professor in the TLUS program. What are some issues that are arising specifically in mathematics? We know that there are some issues with performance in math across the country. We've always talked about that. But what are some of the causes, and particularly in middle school grades, that keep our math scores from rising, I guess would be the word? One of the things we think about is the nature versus nurture view of math. Most people and many, many children believe that math is something that they either can do or they can't do. They're born with it or they can't do it. One of the things I always do when I meet elementary teachers for the first time, I always ask them, well, how many of you like math? And I almost never get any hands. No one ever wants to admit that they like math. They think I'm crazy when I'm like, I'm a math geek and I talk about math all the time. They hate it. And it's that view that math is difficult and I can't get it unless I have a, brain to do it. And I try to work with teachers to see that you can teach good math skills. You may not be the absolute fabulous best math person in the world, but you definitely can do math well if you're taught in a way that helps you understand it. And then that goes to the second point, the procedural foundation of learning math. We tend to teach math in the operations and procedural way. We don't get to the conceptual way, particularly in elementary school. We're struggling with that idea, and when they get to middle school, it's even more prevalent. And then students have to memorize. If they don't memorize well, if they're not a good memorizer, as I call it, they will continue to struggle in math if it's taught in a procedural way. So we need to move away from that and really develop the understandings for the operations, for all the number systems, and make it more to what I call a problematic stance of math, that they can problematize a math problem to figure out how to solve it. If they don't remember the formula, if they don't know the theorem, how can I think through the problem so that I can figure it out? And that's an area in math that we are still fighting. We want to push that more in mathematics. Another area is related to that is that the higher you go in math, we tend to rely on the procedures rather than understanding. And we have to continue to push the understanding of how to do math. One of the things I realize is that when I taught in 7th and 8th grade math for a number of years. Between that time, I took the GRE when I first got out of college, and then when I was about to apply to graduate school. And the difference in my score was phenomenal. I didn't take any math classes. I didn't study for the test. All I did was teach 8th grade math through a conceptual framework. And I taught myself how to problem solve no matter what. I mean, there were some questions there I still don't know what they were, like 1 to the star is equal to x, y. I don't know what that was. But for the rest of the problems, I could figure them out. And I was able to do really well. And that's when the light bulb for me went on, thinking, if I could teach my students to think about math and not always feel like I have to get the formula, which teachers always do, say, what's the formula to answer this problem? But think about it. It makes sense. Math can make sense. And we struggle helping students and teachers to see that. And then the final one is one that we probably all dealt with, school math versus real math. When do you use math? That's the ultimate question that students ask in algebra and trigonometry and pre-calc. When am I ever going to use this? There are multiple, billions of ways to use math in the real world. And not only that, but you can also make math something to think about. So we can do all of these things in math, supporting teachers to learn it first so that they can go ahead and teach their students the same thing. That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, if you're interested in looking at middle level research, there's an association I'm a member of, is the Association for Middle Level Education. This is their website. They have a whole section.
That's my theme. It worked very well. Thank you very much. It is the early grades leading again, and that's sort of the point that I want to make here. Do you know this phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants? It's a phrase often attributed to Isaac Newton, but in fact I think it was originally attributed to Bernard of Chartres, probably as early as 1200 or so. And the point that he was making was that we are like dwarfs on the shoulders of giants, so that we can see more than they and things at a greater distance, not by virtue of any sharpness of sight on our part or any physical distinction, but because we are carried high and raised up by their giant size. Now, I think that's what's happening here. I'm going to be raised up by Dale and Lynette and the work that they do. Dale is a gifted, accomplished psychologist and empirical researcher, and her recent work on young children and self-regulation should convince all of us of the need for early childhood education. Lynette is a gifted practitioner. A lot of people say, oh, well, college professors in education, they live in the ivory tower, they lose their ability to teach. I was in a classroom, a middle school classroom with Lynette last year, and the teacher was called out of the classroom for some reason, and I sat there while Lynette stood up, looking happy as a pig in slop, went to the front of the classroom and picked up without a beat, convincing these children that she was, in fact, the authority, but also someone they wanted to learn from and talk with. It was really something to see, and it makes me feel good that we are not living in an ivory tower, that we're in the mud and we know what's going on. I am only a poor philosopher. And so I will ask questions, because that's what philosophers do. And I won't give you any answers, but that still may take us somewhere. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, the giants who teach in elementary and middle schools, and I should have included parents in that. What we can accomplish in the high school today
is, as I think both Dale and Lynette were suggesting to you, utterly dependent on what happens not just in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but also on what happens at the age of 3, at the age of 4, at the age of 5, and I would go all the way back to prenatal care, as I think Dale suggested to us. The question that I think some of you may be thinking about, are high schools working? And I would say, well, don't ask that question unless we talk about how we can tell. One of the ways that we often try to tell is test scores, but you know, it's hard to tell by test scores. First of all, because we have so many different kinds of tests. We have SAT tests, we have TCAP tests, we have NAEP tests. If you want to talk about those, we will, but I'm not going to go into it. And they tell us different stories. Some are telling us that things are going fairly well, some are telling us that things are going abysmally. But the better story probably is that it's a mixed bag and that we ought to be paying attention to fine-grained analyses of these. We could pay attention to attendance and graduation rates and matriculation to college, but I worry that everybody should not go to college, and that why is it that we are not educated after 12 years for some kind of contribution to the workforce? And does everybody want to be in college? Is it a place that's great for everybody? And I'm not sure we know the answer to that. We might consider economic indicators. I had a conversation with Kevin Huffman not too long ago about why we weren't planning for long-term economic indicators to see if our current educational policies were really doing any good. I have often heard people say that the schools are not good. You know, look at the economy, the schools can't be doing a great job. But I never heard anybody during the Clinton administration, when the economy was quite good, I never heard anybody say, the schools must be doing a great job. That's why the economy is going well. So I think we have to think about the real indicators of what we're trying to find out. I would put up there as one possibility goodness. And by that I mean good neighbors, people who mow their lawns, good partners, wives, husbands, good parents, good employees, good friends, good sons and daughters. And what does that mean? It means quite a lot to us. And how do we measure that? Do we have any ways of measuring that? And then finally, when push comes to shove, we break down and we ask the public, well, what do you think? Well, you know, employers say 40% of the people come to them without the skills to do the job. I have some thoughts about that, but that's another story. Interesting, the Phi Delta Kappan survey every year proves that Americans think that their schools, the schools their kids go to, earn a B or an A grade, but the schools that other kids go to are Ds. Now, how can that be in the entire system? So we ask whether schools are working well, and I would again say maybe that's the wrong question. Which schools are working well? Because some are. And they're schools that have all of this: leadership, vision, high expectations, high levels of trust, focused goals, family support, integrated professional development. Wouldn't you love to operate in an environment like that, where you're paid attention to, where you can communicate, where your ideas are taken seriously? I think of places like Google, where they have a 20% rule. You're allowed to spend 20% of your time doing whatever you want to, as long as it's prompted by some of the challenges of Google. 20% of your time to carry out the ideas that come to you. Now, I'm going to kind of skip this because in the interest of time, but if we put this high school in historical perspective, what we find out is that after World War II, and some of you know a little bit about this, the average age of schooling in this country, about 8 years of schooling. It's well over 12 years now. We are staying in school, and this is very important, we are trying to educate everybody through high school, which we did not do 50 years ago. We didn't even try. And so it's raising all kinds of new possibilities for us. There are, for secondary educators, it seems to me, 3 challenges, 3 questions I'm going to raise. The first is, are we teaching all of our young folks the right stuff in the right way? Second, are they sticking with us? And if not, why not? And finally, how are we coaching them through adolescence toward responsible adulthood? That goodness I was talking about. Now, there are perennial tensions with respect to the right stuff, and here is your quiz this morning. The perennial tensions with respect to the right stuff involve the question of the academic versus the vocational or the practical versus education for autonomous citizenry. So here's the quiz. Who advocated the academic, the intellectual? Thomas Jefferson, very good. And who advocated the practical, the vocational? Benjamin Franklin. Now, bonus if you get this one. No, unfortunately, I had to go to Europe to get him. It's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But still, we did pretty well. Okay, what about, and again, these are the perennial tensions. Practical and concrete versus abstract intellectual. Do we know these guys? Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois. And a very well-known debate at the beginning of the last century about how we should raise up the Negro race after slavery. Booker T. Washington taking the practical, concrete point of view, W.E.B. Du Bois talking about the talented tenth. We want the academic and intellectual education for our best folks. Now, there's always a perennial tension around the right way to do it at the high school level. We have the directive or didactic, and this is a difficult slide, but does anybody have any idea who I might be depicting there? It's actually St. Paul. It's Lasser's St. Paul preaching. But a modern day didactic would be Bill Bennett. Bill Bennett's Book of Virtue. Perhaps you've seen that. Didactic literature that teaches lessons. Versus dialectic, my personal hero. Socrates, very good. This is W. Socrates. Anybody know these two people? Turn of the last century, progressives. I had to have a woman in here. I was getting a little annoyed about the fact that I had only men. John Dewey, Jane Addams, both of whom articulated, and really in common, a theory of education that was looked at interaction as the mode by which people come to learn. Now, are we teaching them the right stuff in the right way? We've had a number of possible responses. National standards, Common Core curriculum, school-to-work programs, academies here in Nashville, themed magnet schools, which we also have here in Nashville. But the question, again, that we have to ask is for what? Are we educating them in the right way for what? Do we care about educating for qualification, for socialization, or for the development of the unique self? And of course, it seems to me, all of the above. All of the above. We've got false dichotomies going, and the challenge is, how do we figure out how to do all these things? Because we don't want just test scores. Nobody in their right mind wants just test scores. I'm not saying we don't want test scores, but we don't want just test scores. I want a good neighbor. I want somebody who's taking care of their property and, doesn't sit outside drinking beer at 2:30 at night like my neighbors did the other night. Okay. Are the kids sticking with us? And if not, why not? Two reasons why some kids are not staying in public high schools. One is dropouts. Two, though, is white flight or values flight. Folks who are leaving public schools because of racial issues, because of perceived violence. I should have put violence on here as well, but I think sometimes these are coded issues. But values flight as well. Folks who are leaving to go to religious schools or schools that they think, and not just religious schools, but say Montessori schools or other schools where they feel like there are values on the kind of education that they would like their children to have. When they do stick with us, it's not always good news. Sometimes they stick with us just because they can't get jobs and they don't know where else to go. Don't ever downplay the role of schools as babysitters, as places to keep our children, including to keep them out of the workforce. And there is also, of course, they stay with us sometimes because of a perception of high economic benefit. I'd like to think that they stayed with us because they really are excited by what they're learning. But I know that that's not always the case. Now, the responses to this, academic programs that integrate college-ready and work-ready, small learning communities that help kids feel like they belong, which is very important, dedicated dropout programs, I was reading about one this morning, and I would also argue extracurricular activities are a big thing that we do that keep kids in school. Sports. Lots of kids stay in school to play football, to play basketball when they would leave. Drama, same thing. Dance, band. These things are keeping kids with us. And that's okay. If they keep them with us, we have another shot. Now, are we coaching them through adolescence toward responsible adulthood? Lynette talked about the identity challenges, the belonging issues. They continue into high school. The opportunities to be responsible for vulnerable others, it seems to me, is very, very important for big kids. Big kids do better when they are responsible for little kids. This is one of the reasons why I'm actually a fan of K-8 schools, preschool to 8, and why I'm a fan of 7 through 12. In part because big kids get to be role models for little kids, and they can't slough off. It works with juvenile delinquents, by the way. We don't call them juvenile delinquents anymore. We call them juvenile offenders, but when I was growing up, we called them, some of whom were my friends, juvenile delinquents. We really have to create context in which responsible choice is both attractive and possible. And so some of the kinds of things we might do that we have to figure out how. Personal relationships with caring adults. This is the thing that keeps kids in school. Personal relationships with caring adults. This gets at questions of size. Anonymity. We have to take out anonymity. If I'm anonymous, I do not stay. I cut. I leave. Nobody knows I'm not there. So schools have come up with things like advisory structures where you enter the school and one adult is assigned responsibility for you, and you have to bird dog those kids from the time they come in till the time they leave. If they fail, you fail. You might have 15 or 20 kids that you're watching out for over a period of 4 years, say. I also would argue for clear limits and some of the kinds of things that people talk about in hand with judicious discipline and restorative justice. When my son, I had a son similar to Dale's daughter, and when my son was in high school, he did something he probably shouldn't have, and he went somewhere he shouldn't have, and anyway, we didn't know where he was, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and so we are calling all of the parents of his friends to try to figure out if anybody knows where he is or who he's with. So the restorative justice piece of that, after he finally came back, intact, I'm happy to say, is that he had to go visit every person we called and apologize for the fact that they got a phone call at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. This is restorative justice, and this is what kids respond to. And we have to find out how we can figure that out in big urban high schools. Now, last slide. All I really need to know I learned in kindergarten. Robert Fulgham's poem story. This is a little simplistic, and yet you know there's some truth in it. I would argue that I would go back to my idea about standing on the shoulders of giants. What I learned in kindergarten, it's not just about holding hands and treating people nicely. It is about the conceptual development. It is about the habits of mind and the habits of behavior and the habits of possibility that I internalize at a very small level, a very young age. So at this point, as a secondary educator, I'm doing the best I can to replicate the kinds of things that they are talking about at an early grade, because that's still what works. Thank you. DVD.
Well done. You're going to clean it all off. We're ready for questions. You can hear me, can't you? Way in the back.
Yeah, you know, one of the concerns that I have, I've got 8 kids, 8 grandkids at various 7 school and 1 who's going to school. And one of the things that I see the kids doing is they're so far advanced. They're taking trigonometry at freshman high school. They're taking courses that I took at late high school, either in 8th grade or in early high school. I'm wondering, are we just rushing these kids? Are we putting too much? I mean, whatever happened to just reading, writing, and arithmetic? Are we getting too advanced and not doing the blocking and tackling or the basics? Maybe just glossing over that. When I see the kids get out of school and they're going for home loans and they don't understand that if they take out a loan at 105% of the cost of the house, that maybe it might come back to bite them. I mean, they don't seem to be learning some practical things, and I just wonder if we're not getting too organized. You know, you talked about a lot of good things today, but it just seems like it's way past the basics.
Who wants to respond?
I'll start and then we can pick it up from there. Is it on?
Is it working? Yeah, there it goes. You're completely right. If the kids are taking those kinds of courses with no foundations for them, then it's like trying to put on grown-up clothes on a small body. you know, they don't fit and they don't wear well and they don't grow into them. But, for instance, we have some kids who are coming into middle school who truly don't understand the number line. I mean, if you said to them, is 7 farther away from 9 than it is from 3, they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. So you can't give those children trigonometry. And what's happening is we're not building conceptually all along the way so that children are ready for harder content often earlier than we give them. But we give it to them in a way that makes it almost adult-like and impossible for them to understand and grasp it. They're ready for some deeper conceptual knowledge than we give them, and then when they get to these demands of these courses, they're not ready for those because they're not taught in a way they can get them.
I would say one of the things I was thinking about when Dale was talking was the prevalence of the testing. Students test, there are some students that test extremely well, but the limits of what you're testing is so small, you don't understand whether they've gotten that conceptual learning. You just see, ooh, they almost maxed that test out. They bumped against what we call bumping against the top of the test. And so, oh yeah, they should go ahead and they should move forward. And it kind of becomes this whole cycle, and it becomes a status symbol. That yes, my student is in Algebra 2 as a 7th grader, woohoo. But we're not thinking about, well, what are they really learning? They're learning to take a test, and they're learning to almost game the system in some ways, and it can become a status symbol for them and their families and the school even, because they get credit for that, basically having those kids on their roster. So I think partly there's something with the testing that has pushed that forward as well.
I appreciate your concern. I think you're putting your finger on something that is really important. But what we're beginning to understand, I think, better, including some really marvelous research that is going on here at Peabody, at Vanderbilt, decomposing subject matter to understand what are the deep conceptual structures that kids can take on and must take on at a very early age, so that we don't have these big gaps between, say, arithmetic and algebra. I don't know how you experience algebra, but I experience it as a sort of gut-wrenching, tearing me away from mathematics I knew to letters and things, and the teacher saying, let x equal 2. But why? Why? What? Where did you get this? She just made it up, but she never told me that. Okay. We can begin to teach what a function is at a very early age without kids even understanding what that is. So by the time you get to algebraic functions, they don't know the word, but they know what you're talking about. They've had experience with it. So there are ways in which I think we are beginning to restructure, because of relatively new research, to restructure the curriculum in ways that make deep, deep sense. The other thing, though, that I think we have to teach kids, and we're failing at this right now, is how to sit with discomfort. How to stay in the game. Dale alluded to this. How to stay in the game when you don't understand and not expect that you will. And that for your instruction in mathematics or anything else all along will include some questions you can't quite figure out. You can't quite, at least certainly not quickly. And we all have to learn how to just hang in there until the epiphany occurs. And I always hope that the epiphany came before the test, but it didn't always. So I think you're right. There is a sense in which we are running somewhere, and we're not sure where it is, tied to, are we getting ahead? I think the question is, can we ensure deep understanding and this ongoing ability to wrestle with what should be both interesting and challenging tasks all along? And that will take a change in the way we think about what we're doing as teachers.
Yes.
I have a question about the middle school team model and how prevalent that is, both within the city and the state and the whole nation.
My experiences in multiple states of middle school, that's pretty much almost everywhere. I guess the caveat is how well do the teams work together, and how does the school organize the team? Because they will have a team, but whether they are having collaborative planning, whether they're doing interdisciplinary work, that's where the difference is. But on surface, many middle schools are on a teaming concept. I mean, for an example, I work with Bailey Middle School, and they've gone to STEM Magnet this year, and they working on a strong team for doing problem-based learning this year. And I was actually working with my math teacher there because she's had to do a project on natural disasters, and she's like, I don't know how to add math into natural disasters. I don't know how to do it. And we talked to it, and I showed her some things that I had done, and she said, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. But she had to work with the social studies teacher, the science teacher, and the English teacher. They all had great ideas on how to make this a project. She just was struggling with the math, but they're working together to develop that. So, like I said, it is an issue of where and how they do it.
When do they do it?
What do you mean when?
Well,
be specific?
they're teaching how many hours a day, they're at school, how many hours, when do they
Oh,
have
planning time,
time to
yeah.
collaborate?
Most teachers, if you don't know, you get a planning period or, planning period and a lunch period to plan your lessons, to do, administrative duties. Usually, in schools that are really committed to the middle school concept will have a collaborative planning period where they work together and they plan together, or they, talk about students together. They do whatever they need for their team during that collaborative planning time. And mostly you have it every day. Most schools have it every day.
Yes.
I've been very concerned over a lack of family connection in our society. Our great divorce rate, our great unmarried situation for infants and children. And I'm wondering how much involvement of the school programs that this is causing, because it's just very noticeable when children get out and also go to college and this type of thing, and they're put all over the country, and they lose this sense of family. The family's left after rearing the children and so forth. They're left in the community, and the children are gone. And this continues often even into, the stage of getting into a nursing home and this type of thing. And I just feel that we need more family connection in everything we're doing, because we're losing that type of sense, which is very predominant, very important in developing happiness and a good way of life. Another thing I'm wondering about the math instruction is, television is so predominant in the children's lives. They say, it's just unbelievable the amount of television children. There's little math in that. Usually, it's a drama or, some mystery thing or games or something. And I'm wondering how much of an effect this is having on our young people in the math program.
So there are three questions there. One is parental support while the kids are in school. One is dispersion of families. Third is television. You want to take all that on? What about family support in schools when the kids are in school?
Well, yeah. Okay, everything we know says that kids with parental family support, any kind of family support, are going to do better. They're going to persist. They're going to be there, especially if the families are laying out a goal for them. We know that. At the same time, we also know that lots of families, particularly in urban areas, sometimes in rural areas as well, they're not happy in school. The parents didn't do well in school, or they don't feel the expertise that allows them to talk to the teachers, talk with the teachers. And so I would argue that as an educator, I've got to understand that. I've got to be able to read kids, read their parents, and find ways to invite them in. And I have observed both individual teachers and principals who have figured that out, the fear of the families and the concern of the families and the time restraints of the families, and figured out ways to get families involved. I would also argue that schools are community centers in many areas, and that there are talented adults, I'm looking at quite a few of them right now, who might be pressed into service in schools. I'm actually a big fan of national service and would love to see high school and college graduates pressed into service in schools as part of a commitment to national service. I think there are all kinds of ways across generations that we could make students' intellectual, academic, and moral life richer. And families is just one of those ways. But yeah, I think family support matters.
And let me just add the family support issue. The reason one possibility that there's a connection between high achievement and family involvement is that families are welcomed when they have high achieving children. And they go to schools because they feel good about the schools because their children are doing well. The way schools unfortunately reach out to children who are not doing well is often very negative. And it serves, in fact, to keep families farther away from those schools. And if we can help schools do, as Barbara was talking about, reach out, and teachers reach out, even to the kids who are having difficulties, but in a positive way, I think we could make a big difference.
Just one more thing, because I was thinking about one of the projects that we're doing with our teachers who are in Metro that are at our TLUS program is we have a capstone project that they have to complete, and one of the main components of it is family home school connections. They have to devise a way to make connections between their students, their families, and the community in which their school is their attendance zone. And that is a crucial element of developing the relationship that we're looking for to help their parents feel better about being in school. Because we know that some of their parents probably didn't have a good school experience, then their kids are struggling, they don't want to hear it, just like Dale was saying. So we're trying to buffer that and try to get the parents to come in when it's not about their student academics, when it's not about a problem, but to be committed to the school in all areas.
Are there variations here, ethnically, social class, economic status, regard to the participation of parents?
Oh, absolutely. But there are also variations in the schools that serve those kinds of families in terms of how open they are to having parent involvement. Unfortunately, in many urban or high poverty density schools, there's a blame situation going on where it's easier, I say it like it is, it's easier for teachers to blame the parents for not having prepared the children than it is to try to figure out a collaboration that would actually improve both of them.
All right, back here.
In your social makeup in the city of Nashville, is the real estate or the attendance areas, are they diversified enough that you could go back to neighborhood schools? I find it difficult in my own mind, having been an educator in a low-income, family-type community school, that people who are in the negative half about their feelings towards schools because they didn't do well are maybe 5 miles away from the school at which their kids attend. And when you have that type of a situation, it makes it even more difficult for the parents to come into the school and to see what they need to see and talk to whom they need to talk. It's even scarier.
Okay, you just opened a can of worms.
I know I did.
There are, relatively speaking, diversified neighborhoods in Nashville, and probably in many places we could go to neighborhood schools where there would be diverse populations of students. I can't believe that's going to happen because of the not in my backyard kind of phenomenon. I mean, I think there would be a hue and a cry from people who did not want to shake up the situations that they had now, that they were happy with for their children, and that would eventually lead to greater white flight, and not just white flight, but flight of various kinds. So I think it's an interesting question. I think neighborhood schools, generally speaking, are good for the community, and generally speaking, good for the parents and kids, because they can get there. I think you're right about that, and research has demonstrated that over probably 40 years. But that you just walked in the middle of one of the very interesting things about education. It is a political function. And we want certain things out of education and certain voices. Remember I said qualification, socialization, and unique self. Well, most parents, they like the unique self part, and they like the socialization part, and they want the qualification part because they don't want their kids unemployed. But they're not, parents as a group are not the loudest articulators of what schools should be right now. And it has not been since the Reagan administration, to be honest with you, since A Nation at Risk. The focus has been on business leaders articulating what schools should be. I'm not even sure they understand what they need in schools. I think they're asking for the wrong things. But, you know, I'm not going to speak for them. Nonetheless, because it's a political hassle, that's what we're left with. And I think we have to take that into account. Whenever we say, should we do this, we then have to go to the political dimensions of pulling it off.
do a follow-up on this? That being said and understood, does it make it more difficult to teach life skills when you have a geographical setting that is large rather than a community setting? Do you understand what
I
mean
don't
by
think
that?
so. Dale, I don't know if you, my sense of teaching life skills is you just need a really, really, really smart teacher. And I don't, look, when you and I were young, who became teachers? Very smart women. Today, those very smart women, black or white, have other options. So that means we are recruiting teachers to a very difficult profession. And those of you who have done it understand the difficulty of it. It may not look like it from the outside, but it's really challenging intellectual and moral work. So we have to recruit, I apologize, we have to recruit very smart people to a profession that right now, starting or salary around here, 28 now, going to a max of 46 or 47, and right now being in the press, basically dissed. Vilified, yeah, I'll go further. I'll go with Dale. Vilified. Are you telling your grandchildren, go into teaching? It's the most important thing to do. You probably are not. For a whole lot of reasons. So the problem is teaching life skills with conceptual academic skills and understandings just requires somebody whose mind is very, very agile and who is themselves well educated. So we have to find those people who like doing that kind of play back and forth, and continue to bring them into teaching. But I don't think geography makes a difference.
Over here, Lottie? Yeah.
Community schools would not be better at life schools than?
I don't.
No, Ms. Strupp over here.
I assisted in one of our public schools for a while, teaching English as a second language. And we had that particular area was full of Kurdish children. And because they always congregate in the same places if they're the same nationality, because they can speak their own language, etc. Well, most of these parents spoke no English or very, very little English. How do you deal with that?
Okay. It's English language learners and the fact that their parents don't speak English. Okay, I'm just, well, we might as well just, we're all friends here. We've dealt with this for 200 years as a country. We had excellent schools in New York City, and we had enclaves of people who spoke only Italian as parents, who spoke only German, who spoke only Polish. Our public schools for years, for generations, have worked with the children of those parents and educated them. I really think people are focusing on this issue as an excuse.
That's it? No, we have 5 more minutes. Don't we, Sally? You want to say some more? Yeah.
No.
Okay. Sally, what do you want to say?
As you refer to occasionally, testing has become a big deal. The question that arises about testing is that it's used in order to find a means of making teachers accountable. So talk to us about, if not testing, how do we get this accountability? You probably need to repeat.
Well, the whole question of teacher evaluation, which is really hot.
Will
You wanna
come up
speak?
again, right? Don't you having a whole session on it?
Or where are we? I don't know, Sally would know.
We do have teacher quality, how we deal with diversity and effectiveness
Well, you have to come back then. Ms. Gay, you wanted to ask something?
I really believe what Dale was saying about the importance of early childhood development, even the prenatal situation, and it feels like we're not addressing that. We no longer teach child development to everyone, and having worked in the public school system, I ran into parents of every socioeconomic position who really didn't know what they should be doing, either, and we have a health crisis in terms of diet, and cooking no longer seems to take place in a lot of homes, and I don't know, to me, those are concerns of a national, on a national level, and yet we don't seem to be addressing them, along with the whole, I don't know, when you focus just on testing and it's the whole, we need whole, healthy human beings, physically and mentally, and we're not addressing.
What I was thinking of was, well, is that the school's role? And I don't know, and we do take it on in schools. I mean, I know at, I think it's Apollo Middle School, they have a healthy snack every week. Like it's a program that they come and they talk to students about the healthy snack and they make them try it. And it's funny because some of the teachers are like, oh, I don't like cauliflower, but I have to do it because the kids have to eat it. But they do it to show the kids the healthy snack. But how much can the school do in that situation? Where do you draw the line? Because you can see the other issues that we have to deal with in schools. How do we add that in effectively to make it, because it's important, and I know we help students see it, and maybe that's enough, but I don't know what the research is on it to see.
My mother was a home economics teacher, obviously a long time ago, and all of us took basic home economics where we talked about child development and cooking and sewing and budgets, how to do, looking at mortgages and this kind of thing, and that's no longer taught. My own daughters were taking AP courses, and sometimes I think, ooh, I should have addressed some issues, that I didn't. And, that seems to have, we're so stressed on high-level things, and yet I think these other things are important too.
I'd like to comment as a follow-up to what Lynette said. I think we do have to ask whether schools have the responsibility of doing that. And if they do, by the way, then we have to give them a whole heck of a lot more money and more support. But I have a theory, and I'm going to say this publicly just to be, maybe I'll get shot. My theory right now is that schools are under such scrutiny because we cannot solve the real problems. We don't know what to do about the economy. We don't know what to do about poverty. We don't know what to do about child hunger and food deserts. We don't know what to do about a whole host of social problems. So we pick on the one social institution that, frankly, except in some places, isn't doing all that badly. And we go after them with all of our might. We demonize and vilify teachers. We blame schools for social ills because we just don't have the wherewithal. We don't know what to do about all the real problems. And so I'm not trying to say that there isn't more we can do in schools and that there's always a sense of urgency, a greater commitment to students, a willingness to understand all students with everything that they bring. All of that's truly critical. But look, folks, school kids didn't segregate the world. School kids didn't start the economic crisis. School kids didn't cause the mortgage crisis. We didn't do any of that, and teachers didn't either, and I will point out to you that there is also a piece of it's kids who won't fight back, and teachers are largely women who are busy trying to take care of people and often don't fight back. In Portugal, by the way, where there are more male teachers, I was in 2008, there was a strike on a Sunday in Portugal. 110,000 teachers, there are only 114,000 in the country, 110,000 showed up in Lisbon one Sunday to protest a new teacher evaluation system. That's not going to happen here because teachers are in their classrooms trying to figure out what to do for every flippin' kid.
One last thing, and then I think in almost every other industrialized country except us, there are family policies that are coherent starting from in utero and across the early grades. So 80% of 2-year-olds, for example, in Sweden are in group care, and that group care focuses on social skills and interactions, but that follows 6 months of paternity leave, first for the mother, and then 6 months for the father. We can't even get 6 weeks of paid leave in this country.
Now we're back to politics where I feel at home. Now, that's it. We got to clear the room. I'm sorry. Thank you. I told you they were good.